My sister died during a game of hide and seek in the woods when I was 10 years old. There were 5 of us who watched it happen. The problem is none of us remember it the same way. Not even close. I remember a full moon reflecting on the creek in that night. Jonah says there was no moon. Nora says there was no creek. And last month when I asked Zeke about the cousin who taught us the game in the first place, he looked me dead in the eye and said he did not have a cousin. He said he used to know who taught him. He said he swore he used to know. That is when I understood that whatever killed my sister that night was not finished. It was not taking children. It was taking the truth. And every single year that passed, it took a little more. I am writing this down now because I am not sure how much longer I will remember any of it. And because last night I heard a whistle behind my house. One long note. The same note that started the game 8 years ago. I have not been back inside since. Part 1. My name is Ellie. My sister Willow died 8 years ago during a game of hide and seek in the woods behind our town. There are 5 people who remember the night she died. The problem is none of us remember it the same way. For 8 years, I convinced myself that trauma was enough to explain that. People misremember things after something terrible happens. Memories blur and details get crossed. Psychologists have written entire books about it. But our memories are not just blurring, they are changing. Last month, I asked Jonah what phase the moon had been that night. He stared at me for almost a minute before answering. He said there was not one. I thought he was joking. I told him there had to have been a moon because I remembered it reflecting on the water. He said there was not one. Then he asked me why I was smiling. I was not smiling. That conversation finally convinced me to write this down before I forget anything else, or before my memories change again. My mom always used to say, Willow was born to be a sister. Willow was 4 years older than me. She taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels, how to whistle through a blade of grass, and how to spot deer before they spotted you. If I scraped my knee, she was already digging a Band-Aid out of her pocket before I started crying. She never forgot my birthday. She never treated me like I was annoying. She wanted me around. If she and her friends rode their bikes to the creek, I would be wobbling behind them on my little blue bike. If they built a fort in the woods, there would always be a place inside for me. Whenever she noticed I had fallen behind, she would stop, reach her hand back without even looking, and wait until I caught up. That is the image that comes back the most. Her hand reaching back, waiting for mine. Sometimes I wonder if that is why I keep dreaming about her. Because in every dream she is still waiting. I just never reach her. We lived in a tiny community surrounded by forest. One road led in, the same road led back out. Everybody knew each other. Most families had lived there for generations. Mine had. So had Zeke's. So had Bee's. There was not much for kids to do besides wander the woods, fish in the creek, or bother each other. That is probably why Willow ended up friends with Zeke. Even when I was 10 years old, I knew he was trouble. Adults described him as rough around the edges. Zeke was not the kind of bully who punched people. He liked finding out what scared you. Then he would make everyone laugh about it until you wished he had just punched you instead. I never understood why Willow kept hanging around him. Looking back now, I do not think she liked him very much. She just did not have many choices. The only good thing Zeke ever did was introduce me to his cousin Nora. She was 11 and painfully awkward, all elbows and knees and oversized hoodies she had almost certainly stolen from her older brother. She could spend an hour talking about frogs, but could barely look strangers in the eye. We became friends almost immediately. With Nora came Bee. Bee was the quietest person I had ever met. She always looked like she was listening for something nobody else could hear. It started a week after my 10th birthday. My parents had driven into the nearest city for dinner and would not be home until late. They always trusted Willow to watch me. The second their car disappeared down the road, she called her friends. By 7 o'clock, our living room was full. There was Willow, Zeke, Nora, Bee, and Jonah. Jonah was 13. If Willow had been the sister I wanted, Jonah was the brother I never had. He was the only person Zeke never seemed able to get under the skin of, mostly because Jonah refused to play his games. When Zeke made fun of someone, Jonah changed the subject. When Zeke wanted to scare me, Jonah sat beside me. When Zeke tried starting arguments, Jonah usually ended them with a shrug. Looking back, I think he spent most of that summer quietly making sure everyone else got home safe. He just could not save Willow. By sunset, we had gone through 2 bags of chips, almost a dozen cans of pop, and every board game in our house. Zeke announced he was bored. Nobody answered. Then he smiled and said he knew a game. Willow groaned and said every time he said that somebody got hurt. He said not this one. He said it was just hide and seek. Nora snorted and said congratulations, he had invented being 6. Zeke said it was not normal hide and seek. He said you play it in the woods. The room went quiet and B looked up immediately and said no. Zeke asked no what. She said she did not need to know the rules. Just no. He laughed and asked if she was scared already. B said her grandma told her not to play games in the woods after dark. Nora sighed and said her grandma also said not to whistle after sunset. Then B said something that made the whole room go still. She said her grandma told her there are games people made for each other and there are games that were never meant for people at all. Zeke laughed it off. Then he said his cousin had taught him this game. Willow asked what cousin and pointed out they had been in the same class since kindergarten and he had never mentioned any cousin. Zeke shrugged and said he had a lot of cousins. Willow studied him with a look I had seen before. She did not believe him. Zeke leaned forward and explained the rules. You split into pairs. When he whistled once, everybody turned off their flashlight. When he whistled again, you turned them back on. I asked what happened if someone lost. He said the consequences could be severe. B stood up and said she was going home. Then Zeke looked directly at me and smiled and said he had almost forgotten one last rule. No crying, because if you cry, something hears you. I felt my stomach twist. Then he laughed and said he was kidding. Willow smacked him on the arm and crouched down in front of me until we were eye level. She asked if I wanted to go or if I wanted to stay home. I looked around the room. Nobody else was backing out. I did not want everyone to think I was a baby. I told her I would go. She sighed and said she figured I would say that. Then she walked quietly over to Jonah and whispered something. I only caught part of it. She asked him to keep an eye on me. Jonah nodded and said he already planned to. Willow smiled and thanked him. 8 years later, that is the last normal conversation I remember having with my sister. An hour later, she was gone. Zeke insisted on being the seeker, and nobody argued. Looking back, I do not think it was because he was the loudest. I think we were all relieved not to be the one standing alone while everyone else disappeared into the trees. He walked us to the edge of the woods where the trail narrowed into darkness. During the day, it was where kids built forts. At night, it looked completely different. The trees leaned together overhead until the path became a tunnel. Zeke pulled 6 cheap flashlights out of an old backpack and handed them out one by one. When he reached me, Willow took mine first, clicked it on, frowned, and smacked the side until the beam stopped flickering. She handed it back and told me not to lose it. She looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she ruffled my hair. We split into pairs without really talking about it. Jonah stayed beside me. Nora drifted toward B. Willow ended up with Zeke. At least that is what I remember. 8 years later, Jonah swears Willow never went with Zeke. He says she grabbed his arm just before Zeke started counting. Nora remembers Willow walking off by herself. B insists there were never any pairs at all. I do not know who is right anymore. Zeke covered his eyes against the biggest oak near the trailhead and shouted that he was counting to 60. His voice echoed farther than it should have. Jonah nudged me and we slipped into the woods. At first it was almost fun. The beam from my flashlight bounced over roots and moss-covered rocks. Crickets chirped all around us. Every now and then, Jonah would point at a strange-shaped stump or whisper that he had spotted Bigfoot just to make me smile. I kept giggling, not because it was funny, but because that is what 10-year-olds do when they are trying not to be scared. Eventually, we ducked behind a fallen maple whose roots had pulled a wall of dirt out of the ground. We sat together, and the forest seemed wrong, quiet. Somewhere in the distance, Zeke reached 60. Then came the whistle. One long note. I jumped. Jonah immediately clicked off his flashlight, and I did the same. Darkness swallowed us. Not ordinary darkness, the kind where you can still make out tree trunks and patches of sky. This was complete. I held my hand inches from my face and could not see it. I told Jonah I thought I heard breathing right in front of us. He said he did not know whose it was. Then another whistle echoed through the woods, short and sharp. Jonah switched his flashlight back on. Later he told me he only remembered the lights being off for a few seconds. I thought we sat in darkness for 10 minutes, maybe longer. When we walked back toward the trail, everyone else was already there. Everyone except Willow. Zeke cupped his hands and shouted that the game was over. Nothing. Nora laughed and said she was committed. Zeke shouted again. Still, nothing. We waited. Another minute passed. Then another. Zeke's grin slowly disappeared. We started calling her name as we walked deeper. Every shout seemed to disappear into the trees. Then B stopped walking and asked if we had heard that. We all froze. Before she finished speaking, it came again. A laugh. Just one. Bright and familiar. Willow. It sounded exactly like she did whenever someone tripped over a root or lost a board game. Relief washed over me, instantly. I started to turn toward the sound, and then stopped. Because it had not come from ahead of us. It had come from above. High overhead, Every flashlight swung into the branches, the leaves glowed white, nothing. I remember seeing what looked like the bottom of a white sneaker, balanced impossibly high in the canopy. I blinked, and it was gone. That is one of the things we still cannot agree on. I remember seeing a shoe, Nora remembers a hand, B says she saw nothing at all, Zeke insists every branch was perfectly still. The only thing all five of us agree on is that we heard her. We kept searching. The deeper we went, the less familiar the woods became. The trail disappeared. At one point, Jonah stopped and said we had been walking downhill for a while. Nora said we had been climbing. B burst into tears and said we were lost. Zeke snapped at all of us to shut up and look. Then Nora's flashlight flickered. She smacked it, and the beam steadied, then dimmed again. Mine did the same. One by one, every flashlight began fading, not dying, just getting weaker. The darkness between the trees seemed to drink the light before it could reach very far. Jonah changed his batteries. Nothing changed. He said they were brand new. The woods had become impossibly quiet. No crickets, no wind, no birds, just 5 children breathing. I do not remember who noticed it first. There was someone lying beneath a cedar tree. At first I only saw the blue sleeve of a hoodie, then her shoes, then her hair. For one impossible second I smiled. I thought Willow was asleep. She was curled on her side with one arm stretched out in front of her. Her hand was open, waiting. The flashlight slipped from my fingers and I started to run to her. Jonah grabbed me before I could get to her side and told me not to. His voice broke as I struggled to get free. I looked past him and really looked. Willow was not breathing. Her eyes were open. She was staring into the trees. I do not remember screaming. Everyone else says I did. What I remember is crying. All of us were crying. Zeke dropped to his knees and threw up. Nora wrapped her arms around B. Jonah kept telling me to stop looking. Somewhere far off in the woods, another whistle drifted through the trees. Nobody moved. None of us turned toward it. None of us remembered hearing it until years later. That is the strange thing about memory. Sometimes it does not disappear. Sometimes it waits. The police questioned all of us separately after Willow died. They searched the woods for 3 days. The official report called it a tragic accident. Nobody could explain what kind of accident left no footprints around her body, not even her own, or why all 5 of us described completely different routes through the woods. For years, I tried not to think about any of it. Then Jonah told me there had not been a moon. After that, I started making phone calls. The first person who answered was Nora. We met at the little diner on Main Street because neither of us wanted to sit in the other's house pretending this was a normal conversation. She said she knew it was about Willow before either of us had ordered. I told her I had talked to Jonah. Her expression changed and she asked if it was about the moon. I asked if she had noticed too, and she nodded slowly and said she thought he was messing with her. So did I. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I asked her what exactly she had heard when we heard Willow in the woods that night. She answered immediately, crying. I blinked and said no. She frowned and asked what I meant. I told her she had laughed and said she heard Willow laughing. Nora stared at me for several seconds. She said no. She remembered thinking Willow had fallen and gotten hurt. I told her that was not what happened. She said it was. We sat there looking at each other and neither of us sounded uncertain. That scared me more than if one of us had admitted we could not remember, because we both could. Perfectly. Just not the same thing. Jonah was next. He still lived in his parents' house in town. I showed him a map and asked him to show me where we had walked. He traced a finger through the woods and showed me a trail that was not where the trail started. I pointed to the creek and said we had crossed there. He looked at me like I had spoken another language. He said there was not a creek. I laughed and said, we used to catch frogs there. He said there had never been water there. The moon, the laughter, now the creek. 3 memories, 3 impossibilities, 3 things we could not all be right about. Before I left, I asked him who found Willow first. He said I did. Nora thought B did. Jonah was quiet for a long time, and then said he did not remember anymore. It took me 3 days to work up the nerve to visit Zeke. I found him sitting on an overturned milk crate behind his dad's shop with a half-full bottle of whiskey beside his boot. It was barely noon. He looked up when he heard my car door close and something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe? Or resignation. I told him he had gotten 8 years. He said he knew. I told him she had trusted him when he said it was just a game and that I was 10 years old and I had spent 8 years wondering if my sister would still be alive if he had just kept his mouth shut. He swallowed and barely above a whisper said he had wondered the same thing. Then I asked him to tell me about his cousin. He frowned and asked what cousin. I said the one who taught him the game. He looked genuinely confused. He said he remembered saying he had a cousin. He remembered saying the cousin lived near Miller's Crossing, but he could not remember who the cousin was. He pressed both hands against the workbench and said he did not know. He looked frightened. Not guilty. Frightened. He said he thought he just said that. He said he did not think the cousin was real. He said he did not remember why he lied about it. BA called me 2 nights later. Her voice was shaking. She said she had found something about my sister and that I needed to see it. I got in my car immediately. When I arrived, the attic ladder was already pulled down. She said she had been cleaning and almost threw the box away. Inside the box was a notebook. Actually, 3 notebooks tied together with faded twine. Inside were newspaper clippings, funeral cards, church bulletins, handwritten letters, and black and white photographs. None of them mentioned Willow at first. The oldest clipping was dated 1949. Local boy found dead after night walk. The handwriting underneath was cramped and small. He was not alone. 4 children came back. None agreed what happened. The next clipping was from 1968. 13-year-old girl missing. Beneath it, her friends kept hearing her whistle after she disappeared. Another clipping from 1977. A boy. 1986. Twin sisters. 1999. A 12-year-old named Evan. Each clipping had the same handwriting beneath it, sometimes only a sentence, sometimes an entire page. Different memories, no footprints. Flashlights stopped working, never the same story twice. The dates stretched back farther than my grandparents had been alive. I asked B if her grandma had collected all of these. B nodded, then a voice from the doorway said, "Not collected, remembered." Her grandmother stood there holding a cup of tea. She looked smaller than I remembered, not weak, just worn. She said she recognized it the night my sister died. She said she had prayed she was wrong. I asked if she had seen it before, and she said she had played it. The room fell silent. I asked what had happened. She was quiet for so long I thought she had not heard me. Finally, she said, there had been 6 of them, just like us, and 1 had never come home. I looked at the notebook and said, so this had been happening for longer than anyone remembered. She finished my sentence before I could. Then she said something I have not been able to stop thinking about since. She said the rules people pass down are not traditions, they are apologies. I asked for what? She said for forgetting. She opened the notebook to the first page where the ink had faded almost to nothing. Someone had written, if you are reading this, trust these pages before you trust your memory. The next pages had been crossed out, then written again, then crossed out again. Whole paragraphs scratched through until the paper nearly tore. She said she kept changing it because every few years she would remember it differently. She turned to the final page, where the handwriting was shakier than anywhere else in the notebook. Only 2 sentences had been written there. Today, I remembered who taught us the game. The line beneath it had been gouged away so violently that light shone through the paper. Underneath, written in a different pen years later, was one final sentence. I forgot again. Nobody spoke. Outside, the evening wind stirred the trees. For the first time since I had started asking questions, I understood something. Not what happened to Willow, not what waited in those woods, something much worse. Whatever had killed my sister was not just taking children, it was taking the truth. In every year that passed, it took a little more. I do not remember driving home. That was the first thing I noticed. Just the road stretching out in front of me and headlights cutting through empty highway like nothing had ever existed beyond it. No thoughts, no transition, no sense of leaving B's farmhouse. Only the feeling that something had been placed back inside my head after being taken out. The notebook sat on the passenger seat beside me, still open, still pinned on the final page. Today I remembered who taught us the game. I had not written anything like that. I pulled into my driveway without turning off the engine right away. My house looked exactly the same as it always had. Warm porch light, slightly crooked mailbox, the kind of ordinary that was supposed to mean safe. I sat there for a while just listening. Wind moving through trees behind the property line, a distant dog barking, the low hum of insects settling into the evening, nothing else. Then I exhaled and turned the engine off. The silence that followed was immediate, too immediate, like the world had been waiting for it. I got out of the car and walked up the front steps slowly, still holding the notebook. Inside the house was dark except for the kitchen light I always left on out of habit. I did not remember turning it on that morning. I set the notebook down on the table and stood there staring at it. Then I heard it, a whistle. One long note, somewhere behind the house. I froze so completely I forgot how to breathe. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the same way it had in the woods 8 years ago. Like distance did not matter. My first thought was no. It was that this was not possible, because there were no woods behind my house. Just a narrow strip of yard, and then a fence, and then the road, and then Town lights. Still, I moved before I decided to. I walked to the back door and stepped outside. The yard was dim, washed in the weak orange glow of the porch light behind me. Everything beyond it dissolved into darkness that felt thicker than it should have been. The fence at the back of the property was still there, except it did not look like a boundary anymore. It looked like something waiting to be crossed. I walked toward it anyway. Each step felt like a mistake I was already too far into to undo. Halfway across the yard, I stopped. The trees beyond the fence were not the same trees I had seen every day for years. They were older, denser, wrong in a way I could not explain. Then I saw it, a flashlight. Just one, swaying faintly between the trunks. I called out hello, no answer. The flashlight dipped slightly like whoever held it had looked down, then it went out. Silence rushed in immediately afterward as if the light had been the only thing holding the world in place. I reached the fence. My hand rested on the wood. It was colder than it should have been. Then a sound behind me. Not footsteps, not branches, a breath. Right beside my ear, I turned. Nothing was there, but the fence was gone. The trees were suddenly closer than they had been a second ago, surrounding me in a way that did not feel like distance closing. It felt like recognition, and then softly, almost kindly, another whistle. This time it was not coming from somewhere ahead. It was coming from everywhere at once, like the forest itself was remembering how the game worked. My flashlight was in my hand before I realized I had grabbed it. I did not remember bringing it outside. For a moment, I just stood there listening, trying to decide if turning it on would help, or if it would mean I had already agreed to something I did not understand. Behind me, somewhere far back in the direction of my house, I thought I heard my name. Just once. Jonah's voice, maybe, or Willow's. I did not turn around. I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut into the trees immediately, too sharp, too clean. For a fraction of a second, I saw movement in the light. Figures between the trunks, not stepping forward, not retreating, just occupying spaces like they had always been there, and I had only just learned how to notice them. One of them lifted an arm, not waving, pointing. Deeper into the woods. My feet moved before I decided they would. One step, then another. Behind me, the house disappeared completely. Not fading, not getting smaller, just no longer part of the same idea of space. The trees closed in around me, but not in a hurry. There was no chase, no urgency. Only continuation. Like something that had been paused 8 years ago and had finally been allowed to resume. As I walked, I tried to remember Willow's face exactly as it had been. I could, I think. But even that certainty did not feel stable anymore. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Far ahead between the trees, I saw something pale on the ground, curled on its side, waiting. The whistle did not come again. It did not need to, because now I understood something I did not want to understand. The game had never ended. It had only been waiting for someone who still remembered how to play. I do not think I ever left the woods.